Yes, sir. Can you please start with the introduction?
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. This is Ravi Kiran, and I'm a member of the Science and Technology Council. Today, we are here for the third talk in the Nobel Talk series. This talk is jointly organized by Anvesha, the Science Club, and SciTI, the Physics Society of IISER Thiruvananthapuram. And today, we have two speakers among us. And this year's Anvesha is sponsored by Sabari Scientific Supplies and Apparatus. We welcome all for the talk. And now, I would like to request Ritika from the Physics Society to introduce the speakers and welcome them and continue with the talk.
Good evening, everyone. The Physics Society of IISER Thiruvananthapuram and Anvesha have organized this event together. The Nobel Prize in Physics 2020 was awarded to Roger Penrose for his work on black holes, and jointly to Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Ghez for their for their discovery of a supermassive object at the center of the Milky Way. We have two speakers today from the School of Physics, Dr. Bindusar Sahu and Dr. Saumen Basak. Dr. Sahu received his PhD from the Harish Chandra Research Institute, and his research institute interests are conformal supergravity and higher spin holography. Dr. Basak received his PhD from the University of Madras and has received a Gruber Cosmology Prize. I welcome the speakers on behalf of everyone here, and I request Dr. Bindusar to continue.
Thank you. Thank you for this nice introduction, and thank you for inviting us to give a talk on this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. So I will start by sharing my screen. Okay, so as you all know, this year's Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Sir Roger Penrose, Reinhard Genzel, and Andrea Ghez. So this is the Nobel citation. So this was awarded to Roger Penrose for the discovery that black hole formation is a robust prediction of the general theory of relativity. And the other half was jointly awarded to Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Ghez for their discovery of a supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy. So as you can see that the Nobel Committee has been extremely careful in the wording of their statement. They didn't say the discovery of a black hole. They rather said that this is a discovery of a supermassive compact object, and we will discuss why they were this careful. Okay. So let me begin by my talk by a memory from 2011 when Sir Roger Penrose visited IISER Trivandrum. So this is our old campus at the College of Engineering Trivandrum, and you can see some of our old students, faculty member, and our former director also in this picture. So unfortunately, I was not a part of the institute at that time. I just saw this photo. It's very nice. Okay, so most of you, I guess, have already seen this photo in some forum. Okay, so what was really Roger Penrose's work? Okay, so the paper for which he was awarded this prize is a very small paper. It's a 2-page paper, and this is just the first page of that paper. It was published in 1965. Its title was Gravitational Collapse and Space-Time Singularities. Okay, so those of you who have had a course on general relativity and have done some kind of advanced learning even after that can read this paper, and even if it is a 2-page paper, it will take a lot of time to understand this paper. Okay, so what was his work? So this is the screenshot of the paragraph from his paper, which actually mentions about his work. So it's a lot of technical jargons in this paragraph. So let me simplify it. So what he showed is that when there is a collapse of a star under its own gravity, then it was earlier thought that if the star was perfectly spherical, then it will ultimately collapse and collapse and collapse into a singularity. So what is this singularity? We will of course go into the details, but this is a point in space and time where some kind of pathology is there. The laws of physics break down, the curvature is infinite, and so on and so forth. But these are some pathological point in space and time. So earlier it was thought that maybe because of the extremely symmetrical collapse of the star, this is happening. Maybe if in nature we don't have highly symmetrical objects, maybe if there is slight deviation from this symmetry, maybe it doesn't collapse to a singularity. That was thought. But what Sir Roger Penrose showed is that even if there is slight deviation from spherical symmetry, under some assumptions, the collapse to a singularity will still happen. So the collapse to a singularity is inevitable, and thus this was his theorem of the formation of black hole being a robust prediction of general relativity, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize. Okay, so although Sir Roger Penrose was awarded the Nobel Prize, we cannot proceed further without mentioning two of the other great names that influenced it, that directly influenced his work. So one of them is Stephen Hawking. So Stephen Hawking, together with Roger Penrose, they actually extended the original singularity theorem of Penrose into a lot of singularity theorems. And in fact, they together prove that if general theory of relativity is right and our universe falls into one of the physical models of physical cosmology, then if you extrapolate back in time, then it must have begun from a singularity, which we now know as the Big Bang singularity. So this was their work, and the second person whom I would like to mention is Amal Kumar Rai Chaudhuri. And he gave an equation which is popularly known as the Rai-Chaudhuri equation, and that is at the heart of the Hawking-Penrose singularity theorems. In fact, he himself in his paper actually proved some sort of singularity theorem that is not related to the singularity of any space-time, but of some matter, okay, which is known as which is called irrotational dust. We will not go into the details here, but there's some kind of singularity theorems that he himself proved, which was generalized by another physicist named Arthur Kommer, and together the singularity theorems are known as Kommer-Rai-Chaudhuri singularity theorems. So we will also discuss Rai-Chaudhuri's equation in some detail, because that was what was required for proving these singularity theorems. Okay, so this is my plan. I will begin. Is there some question or something? Okay. So let me. So I will begin with giving a brief introduction to general relativity and black hole. Of course, I cannot go into all the details. As you know, we have a full course on general relativity. I cannot give a introduction to general relativity in half an hour. So I will try to give the main points here, and then I will give a more precise definition of what these singularities are. And I will just briefly discuss about Rai-Chaudhuri's equation. And then I will, this is very important, then I will discuss about this notion of trapped surface. So this is the main idea that Penrose actually developed in his 1965 paper, and which was essential for proving the singularity theorem. And then I will just give the statement of the theorem and end with some conclusions. Okay. So let me begin by defining what a black hole is. So all of you must have heard about black hole. Okay, it's some region in space from which nothing can escape, not even light. Okay, so if you want to explain black hole to a high school physics student, how will you explain it? Okay, so a high school physics student would have perhaps know about Newtonian. I mean, when I say high school physics, maybe +2 physics, I would say. Would be knowing about Newtonian gravity. So how do you explain black hole to him? So all of you must have, who has studied physics, I mean, all of you have studied physics in your +2, you must have come across this term called escape velocity. What is this escape velocity? So given a planet of mass m and radius r, Yes, it's the minimum velocity with which you should throw an object upwards so that it can escape the gravitational field of that planet, right? And how do you basically? It's a two-line calculation. Okay, so this is how you find the escape velocity. Okay, so you equate the gravitational and potential energy with the kinetic energy. Okay, and you find the escape velocity. Okay, so the escape velocity given the planet of mass m and radius r. Okay, this is the expression for escape velocity, where g is the Newton's constant. Okay, if you put in the values for Earth, let's say, okay, your escape velocity comes out to be 11.2 kilometers per second. Okay, and you can also see that if you keep the mass fixed, okay, and decrease r, then the escape velocity increases. Okay, so if you keep on decreasing r, the escape velocity will keep on increasing, and at some point the escape velocity will approach the speed of light. Okay, so let us ask the question: at what r the escape velocity becomes speed of light? So you just put v is equal to speed of light. So we generally denote the speed of light by c. Okay, so the radius at which the escape velocity becomes the speed of light is given by this 2gm by c square. Okay, and if you actually do the calculation, if you want to find out, like if you take the mass of Earth and you want to compress it to some radius at which the escape velocity becomes the speed of light, you will find that for Earth this comes out to be 9 millimeter. Okay, so you have to compress the mass of the Earth 9 millimeter so that the escape velocity is speed of light. So it becomes extremely dense. Okay, for Sun it becomes 3 kilometers and so on. Okay, so if at all some spherical object of mass m can be really compressed to this radius, then the escape velocity will become speed of light, and hence light cannot escape, and hence nothing cannot escape. Okay, but the only issue is that in all these considerations we have used Newtonian gravity, and as all of you know, Newtonian gravity is not relativistic. Okay, in the sense that it does not obey special theory of relativity, and we know that if you want to study something where the speed approaches the speed of light, we would need a relativistic treatment. Okay, so Newtonian gravity is not sufficient, although we get some sort of heuristic picture here, but this is not a correct picture. Okay, so what is the correct picture? We would need general relativity. Okay, so what is general relativity? Okay, so in general relativity, all the information about gravity is encoded in something called the metric, which measures distance in space-time. Okay, so you know about distances, right? So suppose I give you a Euclidean space or on a plane, and you have 2 points, let's say x1, suppose I give you a plane, and there are 2 points, x1, xy, and x1, y1. You know how to calculate the distance between these 2 points for a straight line joining these 2 points. Okay, that is the metric. Okay, if it is not a plane, if it is some sort of weird surface, then the distance will be measured by some other metric. Okay, so metric basically uses to measure distance. Okay. So here we are talking about space-time as a whole, okay, not just space. Okay. And there are points in space-time, okay, and metric measures distance between these points in space-time. Okay, and so all this information about gravity is encoded in this metric, which satisfies some differential equation, okay, which is known as Einstein's equation, which is given here. Okay, it's some differential equation. We don't need to know what is exact details of this equation. It's some differential equation. Okay, on the left hand side you have some so all the information related to metric is here. So this R mu nu is called the Ricci tensor. It is constructed out of some derivatives of the metric tensor and so on. On the right hand side you have the information about the matter or energy that is sourcing this gravity. So you need some matter or some energy that will create this gravity. If you don't have anything, there is no gravity. Okay, so that information is encoded here. Okay, so when you have some matter or energy, okay, so you get a non-trivial metric, okay, which means that the space-time is curved like this, shown here. Okay, and in that curved geometry, all particles, okay, will follow the shortest path. Okay, and hence they will appear to be curved. Okay. So if the geometry is not curved, then the particle will appear straight. Okay, but if the geometry is curved, the particle will follow the shortest path, which will be a curved path. Okay, and hence, like the Earth orbiting the Sun and all these things is happening because that is the shortest path that the Earth can take. Okay. So these are known as geodesics. The shortest paths are known as geodesics. Okay. So there are some nomenclature. The massive particles, particles which have mass will follow time like geodesic, and massless particles like photons, which are basically light, they will follow null geodesic. Okay. These are some nomenclature. Okay. Now a standard rule of relativity is that no particle can travel faster than light. Okay, so that is the standard. So light is the maximum velocity. Okay, nothing can travel faster than light. Okay, so this is understood by drawing what are called light cones in space-time diagram. Yes. So space-time diagram is basically a diagram where you plot space, like here we have plotted x and y, and time. Okay. And every point in this space-time is some event. Right? It's something happening at x and y at a time t. Okay, that's an event. Okay, and given a point in a space-time, you can ask a question: what are the all possible paths that light rays can take from that point? So suppose if you are at a point and you are shining light, okay, so depend on how you are shining the light can take different paths. Okay? Now you collect all these paths that light can take at that particular point, tangent to all those paths. Okay, so that will form a cone, which is known as light cone. So suppose you are at the origin, then you get this light cone here, and if you are some other point, you will get this light cone here. Okay, so this is the space-time diagram for a specific, very special kind of space-time, which is called Minkowski space-time. That is a space-time where there is no gravity. Okay, so these are the light cones, and the statement that massive particles has to travel at a speed less than the speed of light means the path of those massive particles in the space-time has to be within that light cone. So this orange line that you see here is the path of a massive particle. So it has to be inside that light cone. Okay, so it cannot be outside that light cone. Otherwise, it would mean that it is traveling at a speed greater than the speed of light. That is not allowed. Okay. Okay, so that was the space-time. So that was the space-time diagram of something which is where gravity is not present. Now let us talk about gravity. Okay, where gravity is present. Okay, so so the simplest solution. Let us talk about the simplest solution to the Einstein's equation. Okay, that was given by a German physicist called Karl Schwarzschild. Okay. And this solution is in the absence of any matter. So there is the solution is where you put that T mu nu on the right hand side of Einstein equation to 0. Okay, okay, and so it is and further it's a very special kind of solution. It is static, means the solution is not depending on time, and it is also spherically symmetric. So since it's in the absence of matter, so it basically describes some region outside a source. Okay, so if there is a source, let's say there is a spherically symmetric star. Okay, so this solution represents the space-time outside that star. Okay, okay, and it is not valid inside the star because inside the star there is matter, and we have put T mu nu to 0 in our equation. Okay, however, let us, for the sake of curiosity, extrapolate this solution all the way to origin. Okay, you can think of this as the solution for a point mass m. Just like in electrostatics you do a solution for a point charge q, you can think of this as a solution for a point mass m. Although in nature there is no point mass or point charge, but let us do that. So if you take the Schwarzschild solution and you draw the same kind of space-time diagram that we drew for Minkowski space-time, okay, so these are the light light geodesics. These are the null geodesics. Okay, this blue and the green lines. Okay. So,
sir.
Yes.
So, sir, means basically, what is the difference between the conditions of a Minkowski flat spacetime and a vacuum field, means vacuum solution, means where there is no matter there?
But then
the Schwarzschild.
For Schwarzschild solution, there is some source. There is some source, but we are looking at the solution outside that source. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
So we are looking for solutions outside that source. For Minkowski space-time, there is no source. There is no gravity. There is no matter, no energy, no, right? So there is no gravity. That is Minkowski space-time. But Schwarzschild solution is, there is a source, but we are looking at the solution outside the source. Okay.
But even if there is nothing in the vacuum, but we cannot like assume and the space is like there is nothing in the
No, we are
vacuum.
looking at this specific solution. Okay. So if you want to describe the correct universe, then of course there are so many planets, there are all these things you have to take into account. But here we are just looking at a specific solution, like in electrostatics you do, right? If you have a spherical ball of charge Q, what is the electric field outside at this point? Okay. So the same question we are doing. Okay, you have a spherical star of mass m. What is the gravity due to that star outside the sphere? Okay, that is all that we are doing here. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So here, of course, I have said that I'm extrapolating my solution all the way to r equal to 0. Okay, by assuming that there is some point mass at the origin, and hence I can do this. Okay. So these are in the solution. If you draw the null geodesics, that is the path that light rays can take. These are the null geodesics, these green lines and the blue lines. So you can see that there is a surface at r is equal to rs, which is 2gm by c square. This is the same rs that we encountered while discussing escape velocity. At that outside that rs, you can see that there are outgoing null geodesics, meaning that on this geodesic, if you shine a light outwards, it will fall out. Okay, and then there are ingoing null geodesics, which if you shine a light inwards, then they will follow these green lines. Okay, but inside this RS, what happens? All the light rays are falling inside. There is no light ray that can go outside. Okay, so that is happening inside this RS. So suppose you are inside this RS and you want to send out light, you cannot do it. Relativity simply does not allow you to do it. Okay, you have to be within the light core. Okay, that is our basic principle, that nothing can travel faster than light. Okay, right? So this RS is equal to 2gm by c square is known as the event horizon. So that separates a region of space-time from which you cannot send out anything. No light, no particle, nothing can come out of that. This is known as the event horizon. Okay. But as we discussed, typically this value of RS is very small. Given the mass of its mass and radius, this RS is very small. For example, for Sun it is 3 kilometers, whereas the radius of Sun is 696,340 kilometers. So this RS is actually inside that Sun, inside Sun. So you cannot really trust this solution inside the Sun, as we have said, right? Because this is a vacuum solution, so it is valid only outside the Sun. Okay. But what happens typically for a star, it is under balance, so there is a gravitational attraction that is pulling in, but because it is burning, so there is some kind of outward pressure due to the heat. Okay, and that sort of balances the star. But in its lifetime, the star will run out of its fuel, and then the core of the star will start collapsing. And depending on the mass of the core, it can form a white dwarf. And if the mass is beyond some limit, which is called the Chandrasekhar limit, okay, which is 1.4 times the solar mass, the core will collapse to a neutron star. And even if it is heavier, if it is more than 3 times the solar mass, the core can collapse further and further till it goes beyond this RS, when the vacuum Einstein solution will be valid, and then it will just keep on collapsing and it forms a black hole. Okay, that is how black holes are formed out of star. Okay. So once the star collapses beyond its event horizon, then there is nothing. It will just keep on collapsing to this all the way to r equal to 0. And this r equal to 0 becomes a point of very high curvature, and all known laws of physics breaks down at that point. Okay. This point is known as singularity. Okay. So this is from Penrose's original paper. Okay, where he depicted by drawing this space-time diagram the collapse of a star. Okay, so so it might be better if I give you a cartoon picture of this space-time diagram. Okay, so what I have drawn here is a time snapshot of the collapse of a star. Okay, so typically when the radius of the star is greater than Rs. Okay, so if you are on the surface of the star and you are shining some light outwards, then that just comes out like this, and then the star is collapsing. Then the radius becomes smaller than the radius here. You have the radius smaller than the radius here. Then the light is still coming. This radius is still greater than Rs, and the light is still coming out, although it is becoming somewhat curved now. Okay, but once it approaches this Rs, okay, whatever light you shine will all fall into the surface. Okay, that is at the event horizon. The light will fall into the surface. It will not come out. And
so this curving of the light is due to the rotation of the black hole, or?
No, there is no rotation here. We have assumed a very simple solution where the star is like spherically symmetric and it is collapsing. There is no rotation here. But because there is the gravity is affecting the light. Okay, so the light is due to gravity.
Sir, if it is like collapsing and it is radiating energy, then
no. According to energy, so we are not assuming
it is not radiating
energy. I'm just assuming that you are some toy observer. Suppose, I mean, you are surviving the high gravitational field of this collapsing star. Okay, suppose you are a Superman or something, and you are on the surface of the star and you are shining light outwards. Okay, you are just on the surface of the star and you are shining light outwards. So this is the picture of that. So suppose you are standing on the surface of the star and you are shining light outwards. Okay, so at this point, what will happen is that whatever light you are shining, okay, it's all falling onto the surface. Nothing is coming out. Okay, so this is like the transition point. And once the star collapses, sorry, this should be R less than Rs. It's a typo here. It should be R less than Rs. Okay, once it becomes less than Rs, so any light that you shine will all fall in. There is nothing that can come out. Okay.
Sir, I have one doubt, sir.
Yes.
Sir, so no matter in which direction we shine the light, it will always come inside, right?
It will always come inside once R is less than Rs. Yes.
Okay, so even though if we like shine it radially outwards,
yes, you cannot really shine anything radially outward. That is this picture, right? So all the path of the light rays, they're all falling inwards. So your light cones, if you see, they are all bended like this. Okay. So if you're far away from this Rs, your light cone is like this. But once you are coming towards Rs, the light cone bends. Then once you are inside the Rs, the light cone bends like this. So everything goes in, nothing comes out. Okay, that is due to gravity. Okay.
yes.
Okay. So yeah, so we somehow discussed about singularity here, right? We discussed about singularity that once this star collapses, and once it collapses to a point, then this r equal to 0, the gravity becomes extremely strong. It is infinitely strong. The curvature, which basically means that the curvature becomes infinite, and this is the singular point. Okay, so any infinity is a singular point. We don't like infinities. Okay, so that is a crude definition of singularity. Okay, at some point in space-time, where something bad happens, something pathological happens. The curvature blows up, laws of physics break down, etc., etc. Okay, but more mathematically precise definition of singularity would be that these geodesics that I have discussed are incomplete. What do I mean by incomplete? That I cannot. So any curve you draw, any curve anywhere in any geometry, any curve you draw, there are some parameters on the curve, right? If you keep on increasing the parameters, the curves keep on extending, right? So what I mean by geodesic incompleteness is that these geodesics are some curves. Okay, so if I keep on increasing the parameter, the curves will not extend for an arbitrarily large value of the parameter. It will abruptly stop for a finite value of the parameter, which is what is happening here. So if you look at this, so these curves, if you keep on extending, then at some point it will hit this singularity here, r equal to 0, and that's it. You cannot extend it beyond that. So these curves are incomplete. Okay, these geodesics are incomplete. Okay, so that is a more mathematically precise notion of singularity. That if a space-time has singularity, the geodesic is incomplete. Okay, so suppose you are an astronaut and you are moving in a singular space-time and you are approaching the singularity. So you are following a time-like geodesic in that space-time. Okay, so what will happen? What you will see is that within a finite time, this astronaut simply vanishes from the space-time. Okay, his geodesic ends. Okay, he cannot move any further. His geodesic ends and he just vanishes. That is the notion. That is a more mathematically precise notion of singularity. Okay. And what we have discussed earlier is that a gravitational collapse of this spherically symmetric star results in a singularity. Okay, that was our Schwarzschild solution, and we saw Schwarzschild solution is a spherically symmetric solution. So if there is a collapse of a spherically symmetric star, it results in a singularity. Okay. However, in nature, as I said earlier, also there is nothing is perfectly symmetric. Hence, it is possible that slight deviation from spherical symmetry may result in singularity not being formed. Okay, this was the question that Penrose asked. So, if I deviate slightly from this spherical symmetry, will I avoid forming this singularity and black holes? Okay. However, what he proved is that under some assumptions, okay, even slight deviation from spherical symmetry cannot stop the star from collapsing into a singularity. And in his theorem, Riccioldi's equation played a very crucial role. Okay. So now we will, since Riccioldi's equation plays such a crucial role, we will discuss briefly Riccioldi's equation. Okay. So to discuss about Riccioldi's equation, let me just introduce some jargons here. Okay, but I will try to keep it as understandable as possible. If you have any doubt, you can ask me. So the first thing is what I define is geodesic congruence. Okay, so what is it? It's a collection of, it's nothing very spectacular. It's just a collection of geodesics in a region of space-time. Okay, such that there is only one geodesic that is passing through a given point. Okay. So if I draw a picture like this, so suppose this M is your space-time, okay, and this is a region, and I take all it's a collection of geodesics, so that given any point, there is only one geodesic that is passing through that point. Okay, this is called geodesic congruence. And given such a congruence, okay, there are various geometrical quantities that you can associate with it. And what Riccioldi's equation tells you, it gives a time evolution of these geometrical quantities that are associated with the congruence. Okay. So this is the equation. Okay, you don't need to worry too much about all the terms appearing in this equation. Okay, what you basically need to know is about this theta. So theta is a parameter which basically tells you whether these congruents are converging or they are diverging. Okay. Okay, so if theta is negative, then these congruents are converging, and if theta is positive, they are diverging. Okay. And this RAB we have seen earlier in Einstein's equation. This is the Ricci tensor. These zetas are tangents to this geodesics, and sigma AB is something which is called shear. We don't need to go into that. But what we need to know is that so these are the things that I already told you. What we need to know is that this sigma B, this quantity that is appearing actually in this equation, this is positive. This sigma B is positive. Okay. So on the top of that, if we impose a condition like this, so this is something that we impose. Okay. This is not guaranteed. This is something that we impose. This is a condition. Okay. And this Ricci tensor, we have seen that via Einstein's equation, it is related to the matter energy momentum tensor. So it is related to the energy density and the momentum density of the matter. Okay, so it's basically a condition on the energy. Okay? That is called strong energy condition. Okay. So if your matter that is sourcing the gravity satisfies this strong energy condition, okay, then from the Riccioldi's equation you see that this quantity is this inequality satisfied. Okay. So you can and then it's a very straightforward. This is simply ordinary differential inequation. It's not an equation, but it's an inequation. So you can very easily see from here that if you start from a geodesic congruence which is converging, that is theta is less than 0 initially, then within a finite value of this parameter tau, which I say that is what I say as finite time, okay, theta will approach minus infinity, which means that all the geodesic will converge to a point. Okay, so that is what Riccioldi's equation tells you. Okay, the only assumption is this energy condition. But this doesn't represent any singularity in the space-time as such. Okay, it is just a focusing effect. So it's like this. So if you have initially some converging geodesic, they will all collapse. They will all converge to one point, and where theta approaches minus infinity. Okay, this is also true for space-time without singularity. For example, the Minkowski space-time that I discussed earlier. For that, RAB is 0. Okay? So if RAB is 0, this quantity is 0, which means this should be greater than or equal to 0. Sorry, I missed that. So that this condition is also satisfied for Minkowski spacetime, but that spacetime does not have any singularity. Okay, so this only tells us about the singularity in the congruence, not of the spacetime. Okay, so the focusing effect of Riccioldi's equation by itself does not tell us that the spacetime is singular. Some additional ingredient is required to discuss singularity of spacetimes. And so Penrose introduced this concept of trapped surface, which is an important concept. So what exactly is this trapped surface? Okay, so so given any surface, as we have discussed earlier, you can shine light either outwards or inwards. Typically, the light that you have shined outwards, okay, it will go out. So at any given point of time, it will expand. Like if the sphere that the sphere will be more in size than the origin, like from the surface from where you have actually shined that light outwards. Okay, so the outgoing light will typically diverge, and the ingoing light will typically converge. Okay. But there can be surfaces in some peculiar situation where both the families of geodesics will actually converge. And such a surface is called trapped surface. Okay. So in order to get an intuitive picture of a trapped surface, let us contrast these two situations. Okay. So this is from this reference, I have taken this picture. Okay. So here I have a stationary spacetime, which you can think of as Minkowski spacetime. Okay, so this yellow. So this is the space at some time t0. This is the space at some time t0 plus dt. This yellow curve that you are seeing is some surface from which you are shining light. Okay, so you have shined some light outwards and you have shined some light inwards. After some time dt, the light that you have shined outwards is given by this blue curve. Okay, and the light that you have shined inwards is given by this orange curve. Okay, so you see that the orange curve is going in, so its size is reducing, and the blue circle is size is more than the yellow circle. Okay, so that is a typical thing that will happen. But think about the situation where your space-time is also contracting. So you have the surface here where you have shined light inwards and outwards. Okay, after some time dt, everything has contracted, including the surface from which you have shined light. But take from the original surface, okay, compared to the original surface, it can happen that this blue circle is smaller in size compared to the original yellow circle. Okay, this is because the spacetime is contracting. So because the spacetime is contracting, the light that you have shined outwards actually cannot cross that surface, right? right? It is trying to cross it, but space-time is, because it is contracting, it is pulling it back in. Okay, that is why this then this surface will be an example of trapped surface. Okay, and that was easier to understand. But here we don't have a contracting space-time. Here we have a static space-time only, stationary space-time. But there is gravity. So you can see that. So maybe it is easier to see from that cartoon that we had drawn here. So this, for example, this would be an example of a trapped surface. Okay. So this is the trapped surface, because no matter what you do, the light is always falling in. There is no light that can go out. Okay. This is an example of a trapped surface. Okay. This is the trapped surface for a spherical symmetric case. Okay, but this trapped surface can occur in non-symmetric situations also. Okay, so this is an example. This is what trapped surface really is. Okay, nothing can come out of that surface. Okay, okay. So what Penrose proved in his 1960? Yes.
So, sir, if the space-time for some reason is expanding, suppose, so there exactly the opposite phenomenon will happen, right? It's opposite surface.
Yeah. So if
is it?
Yeah, if your space-time is expanding, then it can happen that the light that you have shining in, it also comes out. Right? I think everything will come out. It can happen that there is a surface from which everything is coming out.
Yes.
Nothing is going in. If the space-time is expanding, opposite thing can happen. Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what Penrose proved in his 1965 singularity theorem. Okay. So he started with an assumption. Okay. So assumptions are these 4 assumptions. First assumption is that the space-time is smooth. Okay? It's a collection of smooth points. Every event, so as I said, points in space-time are basically events. So it has a distinct future and a distinct past. So there are distinct light cones at every point in the space-time, which tells you that given a point in the space-time, there is a future, there is a past. Okay, that is what I mean by space-time is smooth. Okay. Second assumption he made is that all null and time-like geodesics can start from a point and can be extended to arbitrarily large parameter. This affine is just some nomenclature, forget about it. You can indefinitely extend the geodesics. Starting from a point, you can indefinitely extend the geodesics into the future. Third assumption he made is that Einstein's equation is satisfied along with strong energy condition for matter. So we discussed what is strong energy condition. And fourth assumption is trapped surface exists. Okay, sorry. So this is his assumption. Okay, I did not state the theorem. Sorry about that. The theorem is that all these 4 assumptions cannot be held simultaneously. Okay, that is the theorem. All the 4 assumptions cannot be held simultaneously. This is what is shown. So if you assume if you assume all these 4 assumptions, then one of these is not true. Okay. So if trapped surface existing is true, if a strong energy condition for matter is true, if you assume that space-time is smooth, then the second condition will not be true, which means that the null and time-like geodesics will be incomplete, which is a singularity, which is the notion of singularity. Okay. Okay. So that is basically what you prove. Okay. So in other words, we can say that if the space-time is smooth, if Einstein's equations are satisfied with strong energy condition for matter, and if trapped surface exists, then the space-time is singular. Okay. Okay. So the existence of trapped surface is the crucial thing here. So we saw that in the spherically symmetric space-time, trapped surface is there. But is it also true when you deviate slightly from the spherical symmetric case? Yes, one can show that if your initial condition for the collapse is as close to spherical collapse as possible, but if there is slight deviation from the spherical collapse, then trapped surface do form, and therefore even if there is slight deviation from spherical symmetry, it can collapse to a singularity. Okay, that is the important thing that Penrose proved. Okay. Okay, so let me end with some concluding remarks, and then I will give it over to Shaumen. Okay, so what the conclusion is for Penrose was that very modest assumption about the energy momentum tensor, that is a strong energy condition and existence of trap surface. Penrose showed that a collapsing star will eventually collapse to a singularity, and thus formation of black holes is a robust prediction of general relativity. Okay, and such, however, you can ask the question. So Penrose predicted a singularity, that all this every object or every star will collapse to a singularity. But have we really observed a singularity? The answer is no. We can actually never observe a singularity because it is hidden from the visible universe. Okay, it is inside the event horizon, and we have seen that no information can come out of the event horizon classically. Okay, if within the realm of classical general relativity, nothing can come out from the inside of the black hole, interior of the black hole. So no astrophysical experiment can ever observe the singularity. Okay, so, and it is also possible that classical general relativity no longer holds true inside the event horizon. And once quantum effects of gravity are taken into account, maybe there is no singularity. Okay, and in fact, there are many proposals, and one proposal within the realm of string theory has been put forward by Samir Mathur and his collaborators, which is known as fuzzball. Okay, where the interior of the black hole, instead of, the classical picture of black hole is that there is a singularity which is covered by an event horizon. Okay, but the picture of fuzzball, which is a very quantum picture, is that the interior of the black hole is some ball of strings, and there is no singularity there. From astrophysical observation, we cannot really say whether this is a black hole or a fuzzball. Okay, so with that, I will conclude my talk, and I will pass over to Shaumen.
Sir, one question, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, is the trap surface same as the event horizon, or does it become the event horizon at some point?
Trap surface is any at least for the spherically symmetric case. So any surface within the event horizon is a trap surface. Okay. So if I take okay, maybe this would be better to see this picture. Sorry. Yeah. So this picture, if you see, so r equal to constant is some surface, right? I have suppressed the coordinates of the sphere here. So r is equal to constant is some surface. So this is the event horizon. R is equal to rs is the event horizon. So here, okay. So it is you can say that this is marginally trapped. The event horizon is actually marginally trapped because not all the null geodesic is converging, because a part of the null geodesic is staying on the horizon. It is not converging to a point. But the moment you cross the event horizon, you are less than the event horizon. Any surface for which r is less than rs, okay, for that the null geodesics will converge towards the singularity. Okay, so event horizon you can think of it as a marginally trapped surface. So it is if you take all the trapped surface, okay, it is the limit of the trapped surface where light the light stays on the horizon rather than actually going in. So it is neither going out nor going in, right? So this light this thing is part of the light cone. You can see is lying on the surface. It is neither going in nor going out. Okay, so it is not really a trap surface. Okay, anything less than that is a trap surface.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, so if there are any questions, or we can pass it over to Shaumen.
I have a small question, sir.
Yeah.
So can I think singularity like this? Means suppose there is a coconut. So in the coconut there is a hole.
Yeah.
So two ants is moving in the surface of the coconut, and they don't know some 3D ambient space is there. So they only know about this space they are living.
Right.
So one ants come closer to the hole and they fell into the hole. So the ant never know, right? So they're inside a bigger space where the ant is actually there.
Right. Yeah.
So is it like can we think singularity like that also?
Yeah, but suppose that is you tend to think of it as a singularity, but that is not really a singularity, because it actually, that hole actually smoothly continues inside the coconut, right? So
Sir,
yeah, the hole actually smoothly continues inside the coconut. So you are on the coconut, then you go inside the hole, and then you can actually, the ant can smoothly walk into the inside surface of the coconut. So the other ant will not notice it, but that does not mean that the surface of the coconut becomes singular, because that hole is smoothly continuing inside, and that ant actually can smoothly walk inside the coconut. So it is happily living inside the coconut. The other ant just doesn't know about it.
So, sir, then the structure is topologically connected with it belongs to the same topological space, right? The whole inside region.
Here we are saying, so suppose you have some model of extra dimension where actually there is some extra dimension via which this singularity connects to some another universe or something. Then of course you won't call it as a singularity, right? But if you don't do that, then if that point, so whatever you do, you have to take into the entire manifold into your consideration, right? So if there are some extra some small extra dimensions, and you just don't see it, and you can conclude that there is a singularity, but maybe there is no singularity, because the extra dimension is actually smoothly connecting that point to something else, and the geodesics are not incomplete, right? Yeah. So when you want to talk about singular or not, you have to take into account the full space-time manifold, okay, and not just the part of where you are able to see it.
So in that model, those are not excluded from the space-time manifold, right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yes.
So, does Roger Penrose's paper disprove the existence of naked singularities? That is.
Okay. So that's a good question. So okay. So let me yeah. So this was his theorem, right? So there are these 4 assumptions, and what he proved that all these 4 assumptions will simultaneously not hold true. Okay. But suppose I take into account the 4th assumption. Suppose there is no trap surface. Okay. Somebody has to prove that all these 3 can simultaneously hold true, or all these 3 will not simultaneously hold true. Okay. So suppose that happens. So suppose I exclude 4th assumption from my theorem, and somebody proves that all 3 cannot hold true. Okay, then that would mean that naked singularity can be present, right? That would mean that naked singularity can be there, because there is no trap surface. So if without the existence of trap surface there can be singularity, that is not covered by any horizon. So that would mean naked singularity is there. So nobody has actually proven it. Therefore, it is still a conjecture, which is known as cosmic censorship conjecture. Okay, that there cannot be any naked singularity in the universe. Okay, so there are examples where trap surface will not exist. So, for example, if you take the solution for a rotating star, so a rotating star which is collapsing. Okay, so rotating star has 2 parameters. One is the mass. Okay, one is the mass, and the other will be the angular momentum. Okay. So given some inequality between the mass and angular momentum, okay, one can show that there is no trap surface. Okay, so suppose that inequality is satisfied, it would mean that a star having that mass and angular momentum will never collapse to a singularity. it will stabilize at some point. Otherwise, it will lead to naked singularity. Okay, but there is no proof for that. It is still a conjecture.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions? Any more questions? Okay, so shall I stop sharing my screen? Then I can give it over to Swamil. I'll just do that. Sorry. Yeah, over to you, Swamil. Yeah.
Certainly. So the share option is suddenly not working.
What is the problem, Swamil?
I'm unable to share my screen. Okay, let me try. Yeah, now it's okay. So can you see my slides? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes,
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So before I start my presentation, so I like to thank the Ornisha team for organizing this event and also inviting me to speak about this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. And I also like to thank Bindu sir for a nice presentation. I think in 1 hour time, he has covered a lot of topics regarding the singularity theorem and particularly the Penrose's contribution in science. So I'll not speak about the Penrose's work. So I'll focus on Genzel and Gates' work, who also shared the half of the Nobel Prize of this year. So
hello, Swamil.
Yeah.
Can you make it full screen?
It is full screen.
No, it's not full screen.
Okay, maybe please do it again.
Yeah, you can go to slides. So yeah.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, it is coming.
No?
Yeah, now it is fine. Yeah.
Okay, so in simple words, if I summarize in one line about this year's Nobel Prize in Physics, I should say that this year's Nobel Prize in Physics is about black holes. It's about research in black holes, recent discoveries in black holes, which is one of the darkest secret of our universe. And these objects are not only the robust predictions of general theory of relativity formulated by Einstein almost 100 years back. They are perhaps the most intriguing objects in our universe. In fact, they are so intriguing that Einstein did not himself believe that the black hole really exists in nature. Okay. However, as Bindushar mentioned, that 1965, 10 years after Einstein's death, Roger Penrose used ingenious mathematical methods, mathematical tools, and demonstrated using precise mathematical arguments that general theory relativity actually leads to the formation of black holes. Okay, so while Penrose's work is more about the theory, the mathematical description of the black holes, Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Gage's work is more related to the observation of the black holes, particularly black holes in our universe, in our galaxy. So, in that sense, the Genzel and Gage's work complements the work done by Roger Penrose in 1960s. So, while Penrose actually gave a mathematical formulation, a precise mathematical formulation of black holes based on the general theory of relativity, so Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Gage basically showed that the black holes are not just a theory. They are real, and there exists a monster-sized compact object at the center of our galaxy, which could possibly be a black hole. Okay, so next, before I actually talk about the main part of our the actual work done by the Genzel and Gage regarding the observation of black holes, I'd like to highlight an important facts about this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. Now, in the field of astronomy, there have been many outstanding female scientists, and compared to the other science and engineering disciplines, female scientists has a long history in astronomical research. For example, almost 200 years ago, Caroline Herschel became the first woman scientist in the United Kingdom to obtain an official position for her work in the discovery and classification of the comets. Okay. And there is actually a satellite named after Caroline Herschel. It's called Herschel satellite. Now, Andrea Ghez has become the first female astronomer in the history of Nobel Prize in Physics. Okay. So in fact, she is the fourth female scientist to receive this honor after Marie Curie, Maria Mayer, and Donna Strickland. Okay. The other three female scientists were not from they are not astronomers. Only Andrea Ghez is actually from the astronomy background. Okay, so let's now come back to the original topic. The central theme here is the center of the galaxy, of our galaxy. So the story about the center of the galaxy has a long history, because the center of the galaxy was always been under scrutiny, always under focus by the astronomers in the last 100 years. Almost 100 years ago, Arrow Shapley first determined that the center of the Milky Way was in the constellation of Sagittarius. It's a small region in the center of our Milky Way galaxy. But this discovery is important because before these observations made by the Arrow Shapley, people used to believe that the solar system or sun is at the center of our galaxy. So in that sense, this discovery is important, okay, which happened in almost 100 years ago. And this is followed by another important discovery made by the Carl Jansky in 1931. And he discovered that the radio signals coming from the center, very central region of the Milky Way, which is later named as Sagittarius. But unfortunately, technology was not good enough to pinpoint the actual location of the source. So the astronomers, even there are some observational evidence, even there are some indication about something interesting there at the center of the galaxy, a particular location, particular core region of the galaxy. The astronomers were unsure about the exact location of the signal from which the radio waves is coming. Okay. But people kept on trying, but major breakthrough came in 1970s. Two important breakthrough came. One on the theoretical side and other one in the experimental observation side. So from the theoretical side, 1971, Donald Lindell and Martin Rees realized that the Milky Way galaxy, our own galaxy, might contain a supermassive black hole at its center. Okay, and this work has been done as a part of their theoretical studies on quasi-stellar objects or quasar in the universe. But the evidence was lacking because the galactic core is obscured by the interstellar dust. So if we look at the center of the Milky Way, center of our galaxy, how good the instrument is. If we look through our visible light telescope, optical telescope, then we'll notice a large amount of dust will block our views. Okay. But nature is very kind to us, because while dust blocks the visible light, radio waves can penetrate it. So radio waves can pass through those dusty regions. So soon astronomers realized this fact. They switched to radioactive telescope. Instead of observing the core region of the galaxy using the optical telescope, they started using radio telescopes. So in 1974, so that is about the theoretical side. Okay. In 1974, another breakthrough happened, but that is on the observation side. Two famous astronomers, Bruce Balick and Robert Brown, used radio telescope of the US National Radio Astronomy Observatories to study our own center of our own galaxy, okay, using advanced technology. And they found something very interesting. They found a small core region, a small core in this around the center of our galaxy was powerfully emitting radio waves. There is a source of radio waves which are coming from the very center, very core region of our galaxy. And Michael Brown basically named it as Sagittarius A star. Okay. So further observation in 1990s provided more evidence for the presence of a super heavy compact object in the galactic center. But even with the better technology, it was not, even with the technology they have used, they were unable to pinpoint the exact source of that radio waves, strong radio waves coming out of the center of the galaxy. So they realized they need even more better technology and a clever observing strategies to make any claim about existence of any exotic objects present in the galaxy, the core of the galaxy. Okay, so these are the 1971 and 1974. That was very crucial for in this context, because in these 2 years, two important breakthroughs happened. One is on the theoretical side, another one in the observation side. If I go back to my previous slide, if you see the last line of the research paper, last line of the abstract of the research paper published by Lindell, Bell and Rees, it is clearly mentioned they suspect that there is a black hole present at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. Okay. So here comes the role of Genzel and the gaze. Okay. So think of that we are talking about research work at the early 90s. That is an era when there was no gravity wave detection. The gravity wave detection happened in last couple of years back, few years back. So in early 90s, there was no detection of gravitational waves. So detection of gravitational waves basically the direct observation, direct proof of the existence of a black hole present in our universe. Okay, so that is not possible. So there are two possibilities. So in the era when there is no gravitational detection, the black holes can only be observed through indirect observation method. So one is through detecting the jets emitted by the black hole accretion. That is one possibility. And second is the tracking the movement of the surrounding star, like the stars that is revolving around the black holes, moving around the black holes. But observation at that time, there was no observation evidence at that time about any jets coming out, or any like observation in 90s didn't indicate any hint of jets coming out of the core of the galaxies. So it is not very safe to look for that. Okay, so even if the jets is present, it will be very hard to detect because that source is very far from our Earth. So it will be less harder if we track the movement of the surrounding stars who are revolving around the core regions of our center of our galaxy. So Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Ghez took a risk and they used the second method. So what they did, they made the observation of the orbit of the stars and also measured the time period of the surrounding stars and use those data to calculate the mass of the central celestial body at the core of the galaxy. Now the picture that I'm showing on the screen is basically the simulation of the trajectories of the stars around Sagittarius A star. Okay, and star has some interesting name. It start with S0 and followed by a number. S0 stands for that Sagittarius A star. Sagittarius A star. And S0n means it is the nth closest to the center. So S02 corresponds to the star second closest to the center. So S03 corresponds to the third closest to the center, like this way. So if you see the yellow colored ellipse in the picture, that is the trajectory of the S02 star, which is revolving around some core of the galaxy. Okay. Next. Can you see the animation in my screen?
Yes, we can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is a bit slow, but I don't know whether it's okay. So this is basically the picture I'm showing is basically in the previous slide is basically the one snapshot of this simulation. Okay. So this is actually a combination of like several snapshots taken over which corresponds to the 15 years of data taken from 1995 to 2016. Okay, so here you can see the dots is circling around some central region. A lot of dots are there, and I like to highlight a star present in the center of the picture. So that is actually the center of our galaxy.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
So they named like before the determination of the orbit, or like after the determination of the orbit? Because like if you name like beforehand, so you would have known that like that star is corresponding to the black hole. It's like it's near. So yeah,
No, actually, the name came later.
yeah, that is my point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was using the name because the name was given later, but initially it was considered as a region from where the radio is coming.
Yeah, because once you know the orbit, so then you can only tell which one is the closer, which one is the farthest, right?
I actually telling you the name retrospective. Yeah. So you can see that the center of this animation there is a star. So that is actually the center of the galaxy. And S02, the elliptical orbit, yellow color orbit, is the orbit of the second closest star near that particular Sagittarius A star. And when they study this particular region for a long period of time, as long as 16 years, like maybe 15 or 16 years, they found some interesting, when they analyzed that data, they found something very interesting. They realized that the S02 star, which is the second closest to the center of the galaxy, is orbiting at a time period of 16 years. Now, 16 is a long period of time, but if you compare the same number for Sun, then you realize that how fast that star is orbiting around that particular center. So if you compare the numbers, then you can I can give you that the orbital period of S02 is less than 16 years. But by comparison, the Sun revolves around the center of the Milky Way around 200 million years. Okay. So you can, from these two numbers, you can figure it out that how fast the star is moving around the black holes, the center of the galaxy. Another interesting fact they found is that the distance of the particular star is only 120 astronomical units. So 1 astronomical unit means the distance between Sun and Earth. And even the Pluto is twice the distance from Sun. So from these facts,
Excuse me, sir.
sorry. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, actually, sir, see, I mean, in that about that star, like there are many stars, no?
Yeah.
So there are many number of interactions between each star actually interacting with some like that gravitational force, I guess.
Yes.
So like are they sure that only this many stars are there in that space only?
No, that is that, and
Like,
using the technology at that time, they have managed to get the information about. They've managed to detect these many stars, but using better technology, reject more more stars, which are even very close to that Sagittarius A star.
actually, like this are like in your slide, only some number of stars like 102, 58, and 38. Like these are the closest number of stars. So means I am feeling what like there are much more number of interactions. So of course the number of differential equation will rise. So how they are means you have to solve at a single time that whole number of differential equations. So like how they sure that they are getting the exact thing.
Okay, so suppose it is not a supermassive black hole, or doesn't exist any compact object. So what will going to happen that you will not find any trend you will not find any particular remarkable pattern in the trajectories or the orbit of the stars. This happens, but here they have found a particular pattern in the orbit of the stars, particularly for the star named with S02.
Okay.
And numbers, when they analyze the data and fit with their model, then they realize what I've written in the third point. The detailed analysis of the observation showed that the Sagittarius A star, which is also nicknamed SJR A star, is 4 million times more massive than our sun. So that amount of mass is stored in the center of our galaxy in a region which is no larger than solar system. So size of the solar system is very, very small compared to this galactic scale. Okay, and within that small region, 4 million times, like huge amount of mass, which is 4 million times more massive than the mass of the sun is stored, which is extraordinary. There was no observation radio evidence till then which indicate that such thing exists. That was the first time they realized that such a huge amount of mass is stored in a center of our galaxy, in a very small region of space. So that was a clear evidence of the existence of a supermassive compact object, which is possibly a black hole. So that is the main result.
Okay, sir.
So this is actually of course, I'm not familiar with the their detailed work because they are from the observation side, but yeah. Okay, so, but let me now explain you that what was the challenge that Genzel and Gaze faced. It is not just about taking data and like pointing the telescope in a particular direction and taking the data. The challenge is, there are a couple of challenges. One thing is that particular region of the galaxy could be observed by a satellite, by a space-based instrument, or by a ground-based instrument. Okay, but they chose a ground-based instrument because they realized that they have to make the observation for long period of time, as long as could be decades long, 10 years, 20 years. Okay, so it is not it is very difficult to maintain a satellite for such a long period of time, focusing on the center of our galaxy. Okay, it's also cost intensive also. So they chose to work from ground. Okay, and working from a ground is there is another advantage from working from ground. If you want to change the technology in the middle of the mission, that is feasible. But in case of satellite mission, you cannot change that. Once you send the satellite, it is gone. You cannot take it back. You can bring it back to the Earth. So observing the center of the galaxy from ground was a safer option. Okay, you can change the technology. You can observe the same region of the sky for a long, very, very long period of time. Okay. So, but it has a disadvantage. The disadvantage is that when the light signal, the radio waves comes from the center of the galaxy, they get perturbed by our atmosphere. Okay. So when they pass through the atmosphere of our Earth, they get perturbed. So as a result, even the source in the original picture appears like the source is very far. They are expected to appear like a point source, but at the end, when you observe the same point source, it will be blurred. Okay, it will be hazy. Okay, so if you want to pinpoint the location of the center of the galaxy or the location of the orbit of a star revolving around the center of the galaxy very precisely, then you have to overcome this difficulty. You have to somehow correct for these effect that is contributed by our atmosphere. So this is the main challenge they had. Okay, so in order to correct for that, they use very, very novel technique. they use the technique called adaptive optics. So I'm giving you a briefly what is adaptive optics means. So if you see the top right portion of my slide, you'll see that there are two schematic diagrams. So the left part corresponds to a observational strategy where a highly collimated, highly powerful laser gun flashes on the sky, and that when it hits the atmospheric particles, that creates a fluorescence. Okay, and eventually that becomes a source of light, a source that they are going to measure using their instrument. So they know the exact location of the source because they have designed a laser gun, okay, highly accurate, highly powerful laser gun. So they know the location, exact location of the star, and using that, given that information, they compare their measurement of the location of the star with the original location of the star. And from that comparison, they will be able to measure what is the impact of the atmosphere on the signal coming from that direction because of the atmosphere. Using that fact, they actually make the same measurement, but not about that artificial star generated by the laser gun, but on the real star, which is near the core of the galaxy. And after observing that star for a long time, they make the same correction. They make some correction based on their data they have using artificial star. Okay. So basically, if you see the picture on the right top right corner, you'll see the comparison of the images that we will be able to see without using this technology and with using this technology. So if you see the left part of the picture, you'll see that the images are blurred. They are the images of the stars in the core of the galaxy, but they are blurred because of the effect of the atmosphere. But if you see the same picture, the same location of the core of the galaxy using adaptive optics technique, we will actually pinpoint. You see the dots; those are not blurred. You see a lot of dots present there. So these actually pictures schematically demonstrate the effect of the advantage of using adaptive optics. And this technology is the key. So three things actually went in favor of them. One is, of course, their curiosity about the black holes, curiosity about the core region of our galaxy. Second is patience, observing the same region of the sky for a long period of time. Long means very long, years after years, it could be more than decades. Okay, we need a lot of patience to observe the same region of the sky for 15, 16 years. And third is the use of latest technology that was available in the early 90s. The right set of technology. This combination of these three, their curiosity about the central region of the black hole, the central region of the galaxy, patience, taking data from long period of time, very long period of time, and third is the using the right set of technology, latest technology, which is adaptive optics. The combination of these three was the key to their success. And that's why they got the Nobel Prize in physics. That's why they were awarded Nobel Prize in physics in this year. Okay. So before I end my seminar, I'd like to highlight one important paper that was put in the archive very recently, just a couple of months ago in August. So people, the Genzel and Gazes group are still they are still searching for more stars in the central region of our galaxy. The objective is this, that they suspect there are more stars. Like just, I think one student actually, someone asked me that there is a possibility that there may be more stars than actually present in their data in 1990s. Yeah, that's true. There are more stars, they expect that there are more stars present, and some of them could be at the vicinity of that core region of the compact object. So if you see, actually this paper is written by, the paper that I'm showing on the screen is basically written by the people in the Genzel's group. But Genzel is not the author of this paper, but the people who are in the author are actually from the Genzel's group. And they actually, the recent data, the recent observations show that they have found a star which they named at S62. They are around at a radius of 17.8 astronomical unit. So the S02 was 120 astronomical unit. This is 17.8, an order of magnitude less. Okay, so why they are interested in observing more stars, particularly stars which are very close to the compact object. The reason is that by measuring a orbit of a star which are very close to the compact object, they will get a better measurement of the mass of that compact object. Second is that in that region, in such a close region, the gravitational effect will be extremely high. So this is going to be, if we found a star which is very close to the supermassive compact objects, then gravitational interaction, the gravitational force will be extremely high. So we'll be able to measure, by studying the orbit of that star, we'll be able to measure, we'll be able to verify the general theory of relativity at extremely high dense region. Okay, so you can test general relativity at extremely high region. So this is the next objective. Okay, so I think there are other efforts also. There is a satellite, there is a telescope, Event Horizon Telescope, which has similar work. And some people expected that their group will get the Nobel Prize because they actually point out like a picture. They actually found a picture of a black hole, but not from our galaxy, for another galaxies. And but somehow that group was not given the Nobel Prize, but Genzel and Gaze's group was chosen for this Nobel Prize. But according to me, that this effort doesn't stop here. This will keep on continue in the coming decades. And with the advent of the better technology, we'll be able to measure, to identify more stars and more accurately the orbit of more stars at the vicinity of the supermassive objects at the center of the galaxy. And using the orbit, by studying the properties of the orbits of those stars, we'll be able to verify general theory of relativity at extremely highly, but in a region where gravity is extremely strong, in a strong gravity region. Okay, so with that, I like to stop here. Is there any question?
Okay, if there are no questions, I would like to make a comment here, which unfortunately I could not do during my talk. So, so as Saumen mentioned, there is they have observed something which they call supermassive compact object, but they just are very cautious in calling it as a black hole. And also, if we look at the Event Horizon Telescope, although I don't think they claim that they have the picture of the event horizon, because theoretically you cannot actually take a picture of the event horizon, right? Because the event horizon is a surface of infinite redshift, so you cannot really like if there is some light coming out of the event horizon, it will. I mean, nothing can come out of the event horizon, and also because I mean, from the point of view of an asymptotic observer, like for us, if a star is collapsing, so as long as it is collapsing, we will see until it reaches its event horizon, we will never see it collapse beyond its event horizon and form a singularity. Because once it is close to the event horizon, it just takes infinite time to cross the event horizon. We can if we wait sufficiently long time, we can observe it collapse to sufficiently close to event horizon, but we cannot really observe it collapse beyond its event horizon.
Yeah.
So what astrophysicists observe is something close to the event horizon. So if you talk with some astrophysicists, they would say that what they have observed is within the vicinity of the event horizon, but not really the event horizon.
Yes,
and
yeah, and I understand your point. Yeah, we're not able to observe the event horizon, but we'll get the indication of that from the attention around the black hole. So I didn't include the picture of the picture taken by the Event Horizon Telescope. So if you see that picture is available in the internet, you see that the core region, the central region of the picture, there is a black region. So that is the and the region outside that black region is very bright. So that is the indication that the central region is actually a black hole, possibly a black hole, highly supermassive black holes, and matter is accreting from the surrounding regions.
But that would be true. Like even for some outside the event horizon also, like till some point outside the event horizon, if something is some light has come out, we would not observe it for a long time. So even that would appear dark to us. We might have to wait for like long time to observe that. So even so what they have observed is within within 1.5 times the radius of the event horizon. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Something close to the event horizon.
Yeah, close to the event horizon, and then by using standard rules of physics, then they can extrapolate and say that okay, there is the event horizon. But
they didn't pinpoint a location, or they didn't say that it's a black hole, but they suspect that it's a black hole.
Yeah, that is why they call it supermassive black object.
Yeah, basically the community, the astronomy community has run out of idea about explaining that result. So only the known explanation would be a black hole.
Yeah, any more questions? Yeah, if there are no more questions, thank you Bindu sir and Soumen sir for the wonderful talk. That was a great insight about this year's Nobel Prize Physics to know from the people who work actually in the field. And thank you all for the audience who were attentive and came up with good questions and provoked the curiosity of the others. So I would like to thank everyone on behalf of Anvesha and Physics Society for attending and presenting this wonderful webinar. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.